I stood in the dining room at 7:43 p.m. on Christmas Eve, staring at my phone screen like it had just stabbed me through the chest. The message wasn't meant for me. That's what made it worse. It was in our family group chat, the one Theodore had created 3 years ago so we could all stay connected. I'd accidentally opened it while trying to silence a notification, and there it was, a thread from earlier that afternoon. Theodore had written, "Mom's being clingy again. Acting like we owe her Christmas." Raymond replied with a laughing emoji and added, "Annoying old woman. Let her eat alone this year. I'm not sitting through another guilt trip." And Diana, my only daughter, the one I thought understood, had simply typed, "Agreed, I'll make an excuse." My hands went numb. The phone slipped onto the table, face down, like even it couldn't bear to look at me. The dining room was silent except for the soft hiss of the radiator and the distant sound of car doors closing, neighbors heading to their own Christmas celebrations. The candles I'd lit an hour earlier flickered in their brass holders, casting shadows that danced across the walls like ghosts of better times. I could smell the turkey in the kitchen, still warm in the oven, its skin golden and crispy the way Frank used to love it. I'd basted it 4 times. 4 times, because I wanted everything to be perfect. If you're hearing this story, I need you to understand something. I wasn't a perfect mother. I yelled when I shouldn't have. I worked too much. I missed recitals, but I loved them. God, I loved them with everything I had. And I thought, foolishly maybe, that love was enough, that it built something unbreakable. I was wrong. If you're new here, please subscribe. This channel is just starting, and every day we're sharing true stories like this one. Stories about real people, hard choices, and the courage it takes to start over. Your support means everything. My name is Josephine Thompson. I'm 59 years old, and I've lived in the same house for 32 years. My late husband, Frank, and I bought it when Theodore was 2. A modest 3-bedroom ranch with a backyard big enough for a swing set and a vegetable garden. The house sits on Maple Street, a quiet cul-de-sac where everyone knew everyone, where kids rode bikes until the streetlights came on, where neighbors borrowed cups of sugar and returned them with homemade cookies. Frank died 11 years ago. Heart attack, no warning. One day he was complaining about the lawnmower, said it was making a weird grinding noise, and the next morning I woke up to find him cold beside me. The kids were grown by then. Theodore was 24, already climbing the corporate ladder. Raymond was 22, fresh out of college with big dreams. Diana was 19, idealistic and determined to change the world. They came to the funeral. They hugged me. They promised they'd visit more. And for a while, they did. But life has a way of filling itself in. Theodore got married to a woman named Jessica, who smiled with her mouth, but not her eyes. They had 2 kids, Emma and Lucas, before the marriage fell apart in a mess of lawyers and custody battles. Then he remarried, this time to Vanessa, who worked in marketing and called me Joe like we were friends. Raymond became a regional manager for a pharmaceutical company and moved 2 hours north to a suburb with better schools and higher property values. Diana went to grad school for international relations, got a job with a nonprofit, and spent most of her time traveling to conferences and posting photos from places I'd never heard of. They were busy. I told myself that was normal. That's what children do. They grow up. They move on. They build their own lives. I was proud of them. I bragged about them to my friends at church, to the cashier at the grocery store, to anyone who would listen. My Theodore works in finance. My Raymond just got promoted. My Diana is saving the world. But somewhere along the way, I stopped being a person to them. I became a task, a box to check, a phone call they'd put off until guilt finally nudged them into dialing. And I, stupidly, desperately, kept trying. I sent care packages filled with their favorite childhood snacks. I texted good morning messages with little sun emojis. I invited them for holidays and offered to cook their favorite meals. I babysat Emma and Lucas every weekend for 2 years, while Theodore got back on his feet after his divorce, even though it meant canceling my book club and missing my friend Margaret's birthday party. I thought if I just kept showing up, kept loving them, kept making myself useful, they'd remember why family mattered. I thought my love could bridge the distance. That Christmas Eve, I'd spent the entire day preparing. I woke up at 6 a.m, put on my apron, the blue one with tiny white flowers that Frank had bought me 20 years ago, and got to work. I roasted a 20-pound turkey, basted it with butter and herbs, watched it turn golden through the oven window. I made mashed potatoes from scratch, whipped them until they were cloud soft. I baked 2 pies, pumpkin and apple, using recipes passed down from Frank's mother. I made stuffing with sage and celery, green bean casserole with those crispy onions on top, cranberry sauce that stained my fingertips red. The house smelled like butter and cinnamon and something warm I couldn't name. Maybe memory, maybe hope. I set the table with the good china, white plates with gold trim that we'd received as a wedding gift and only used twice a year. I folded cloth napkins into neat triangles. I lit candles. I put on a Bing Crosby record because Frank used to hum along to White Christmas while he carved the turkey. I told myself this year would be different. This year, they'd see how much I cared. This year, they'd remember what it felt like to be a family. And then I read that message. I sat down at the head of the table, the same spot where Frank used to sit, and I cried. Not the loud, wailing kind of crying, just silent tears sliding down my face while the turkey cooled and the candles burned low, and Bing Crosby sang about dreaming of a white Christmas. I felt humiliated, disposable, like I'd been begging for scraps of affection from people who saw me as a burden. The worst part? I couldn't even be angry. Not really. Because buried under the hurt was a terrible, creeping suspicion that maybe they were right. Maybe I was clingy. Maybe I had become the annoying old woman who guilted her children into showing up. Maybe my love had turned into something suffocating, something they needed to escape. I blew out the candles one by one, watching the smoke curl upward. I covered the food with foil, wrapped everything carefully, and stored it in the refrigerator. I turned off the lights and sat in the dark, staring at nothing, listening to the house settle around me. That night, something inside me shifted. Not broke, shifted. Like a bone setting after a fracture. I realized I'd been waiting for them to choose me, and they already had. They'd chosen distance. They'd chosen convenience. They'd chosen a version of their lives where I was optional. So I decided to stop waiting. The next morning, Christmas Day, I woke up early. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting pale gray light through the bedroom curtains. The house was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the faint creak of the heating vents. I made coffee, black and strong, and sat at the kitchen table with a notepad and a pen. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I just wrote. First, I listed everything I owned. The house, my savings account, Frank's life insurance payout that I'd barely touched, the car, the furniture, the retirement fund I'd been contributing to for 30 years. Then I wrote down everything I'd given them over the years. Not because I wanted it back, but because I needed to see it clearly. I needed to understand the shape of my own generosity. I'd co-signed Theodore's first mortgage when he was 26, a condo in the city that he sold 2 years later for a profit. I'd loaned Raymond $15,000 to cover his wedding when his credit cards were maxed out. He promised he'd pay me back within a year. That was 8 years ago. I'd paid Diana's grad school tuition when her scholarships fell short, $32,000 over 2 years. I'd bought them cars, furniture, plane tickets home for holidays they rarely attended. I'd babysat Theodore's kids every weekend for 2 years, from 8 in the morning until 7 at night, while he figured things out. I wasn't keeping score, but I needed to understand the math. And the math was simple. I'd spent 30 years building a safety net for people who wouldn't catch me if I fell. By noon, I knew what I had to do. I called a lawyer. His name was Martin Geller, and he'd handled Frank's estate when he died. I explained the situation, calmly, without dramatics, sticking to the facts, and asked what my options were. He listened, asked a few clarifying questions, and then said something I'll never forget. Mrs. Thompson, you don't owe anyone access to your life, not even your children, especially not your children, if they're treating you this way. That sentence cracked something open inside me. Martin was patient and thorough. He explained that I had the legal right to revoke financial guarantees, to request repayment of loans, to update my estate plan however I saw fit. He didn't judge me. He didn't try to talk me out of it. He simply laid out my options and let me choose. Within 2 weeks, I had a plan. Martin helped me draft legal documents revoking the co-signature on Theodore's mortgage. I sent formal, certified letters requesting repayment on the loans I'd given Raymond and Diana, not out of spite, but because I needed them to understand that my generosity had limits, that it wasn't infinite, that I was a person, not a bank. I updated my will, redistributing assets to charities and causes I cared about. The local women's shelter, the food bank, an animal rescue, a scholarship fund for low-income students. I left each of my children a small inheritance, enough to show I still loved them, but not enough to make them comfortable. And I wrote each of them a letter, not angry, not pleading, just honest. I told them I loved them. I told them I always would, but I also told them I was done being the person they ignored until they needed something. I was done pretending their indifference didn't hurt. I was done carrying the weight of a relationship they'd already abandoned. I told them I hoped they'd find happiness, but I couldn't keep sacrificing my own dignity to make them feel less guilty. I signed each letter, folded them carefully, sealed them in envelopes. My hands shook as I wrote their names on the front. I mailed the letters on January 10th. Then I waited. Theodore called first, 3 days later. His voice was tight, defensive, almost hostile. "Mom, what the hell is this? You're revoking the mortgage guarantee? Do you have any idea what that could do to my credit?" "I'm aware," I said. My voice was steady, calmer than I felt. "You'll need to refinance." "This is insane. You're punishing me because I didn't come to Christmas?" "I'm not punishing you, Theodore. I'm protecting myself." "Protecting yourself? From what?" "From your own son. From being treated like I don't matter." He sputtered, tried to argue, told me I was being irrational and emotional. Then he hung up. The dial tone hummed in my ear like a flatline. Raymond texted 2 days later. "This is really low, Mom. I thought family helped each other. I'll pay you back when I can, but this is messed up." I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. Diana called a week after that, crying. Her voice was raw, broken. "Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't mean what I said in the chat. I was stressed and I wasn't thinking and—" "Diana," I interrupted gently, "I forgive you, but I can't keep pretending everything's fine when it's not." "So what? You're just cutting us off? You're giving away everything to charity?" "No, I'm letting you go. There's a difference. I don't understand." "I know. Maybe someday you will." She didn't call back. If you've made it this far, please subscribe to our channel and leave a like. It really helps us keep creating content like this. Stories that matter. Stories that remind us we're not alone. It shows YouTube that this matters to you too. Thank you for being here. The silence that followed was brutal. Days turned into weeks, and none of them reached out. No texts, no calls, no apologies. I half expected them to show up at my door, to demand explanations, to accuse me of being cruel or vindictive. But they didn't. And slowly, painfully, I realized they weren't angry. They were indifferent. They'd moved on long before I had. I was the only one still holding on. But here's the thing. I started to move on too. I joined a book club at the library. A group of 8 women who met every Thursday evening to discuss novels and drink cheap wine out of paper cups. I volunteered at a local food bank, sorting canned goods and packing boxes for families who needed them. I took a watercolor painting class on Tuesday evenings at the community center and discovered I was terrible at it, but I didn't care. The instructor, a woman named Pauline with paint-stained fingers and a contagious laugh, told me that art wasn't about being good. It was about showing up. I started going to the farmer's market on Saturday mornings, wandering between stalls of fresh vegetables and homemade bread, talking to strangers about tomatoes and sourdough starters. I reconnected with old friends I'd neglected while I was busy chasing my children's approval. Margaret, who'd been my college roommate. Susan, who lived 3 streets over and had invited me to dinner a dozen times before I finally said yes. And bit by bit, my life filled itself in. Not with them, with me. One afternoon in late February, I was at the food bank sorting canned goods when a woman approached me. She was younger, maybe 40, with tired eyes and a worn winter coat that had seen better days. She thanked me for volunteering, then said something that stopped me cold. "You have kind hands. My mom used to have hands like that." "Used to?" I asked. Her face crumpled slightly. "She passed 2 years ago. Cancer. I didn't visit as much as I should have. I thought I had more time. I thought she'd always be there." She walked away before I could respond, disappearing into the crowd of volunteers and families picking up food boxes. But her words stayed with me, echoing in my mind for days afterward. I thought about my children, and I wondered if they'd feel the same way someday, if they'd regret the distance, if they'd wish they'd tried harder, if they'd stand in a room somewhere years from now and realize too late what they'd lost. But I also realized that wasn't my problem anymore. I couldn't control their regrets. I could only control my own choices. March arrived with an early thaw. The snow melted into slush, then disappeared altogether, leaving behind brown grass and the first brave shoots of crocuses pushing through the soil. The air smelled like wet earth and possibility. I started planting a garden. Nothing elaborate, just tomatoes and herbs and a few wildflowers along the fence. I was at home one evening, reading on the couch with a cup of tea, when the doorbell rang. It was almost 8 o'clock, dark outside, and I wasn't expecting anyone. For a moment, I considered not answering, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened the door to find Raymond standing on the porch. He looked older somehow, grayer at the temples, thinner in the face, lines around his eyes that hadn't been there a year ago. He held a grocery bag in one hand and shifted his weight from foot to foot like a nervous child. "Hi, Mom," he said quietly. I didn't invite him in right away. I just looked at him, waiting. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside without a word. We sat in the living room, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke. The clock on the mantel ticked softly. The house settled around us with familiar creaks and sighs. Finally, Raymond set the grocery bag on the coffee table. "I brought your favorite tea. The kind with the bergamot. I remember you used to drink it in the mornings." "Thank you." He rubbed his hands together, nervous. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said. About letting us go." "Okay. I didn't get it at first. I thought you were being petty. Vindictive, even. I told Sarah, my wife, that you were punishing us. But then she asked me something." He paused, swallowing hard. "She asked me when I'd last called you just to talk. Not because I needed something. Not because it was a holiday or your birthday. Just to talk. To see how you were doing." I stayed quiet, watching him. I couldn't remember, Mom. I sat there for 10 minutes trying to think of the last time I'd called just to hear your voice. And I couldn't remember. Not one time in the past 5 years. His voice cracked. "What kind of son does that make me?" I felt tears prick my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. Not yet. "Raymond, I love you. I always will. But I can't go back to the way things were. I know." He nodded slowly, his eyes wet. "I don't want that either. I want to do better. If you'll let me. If it's not too late." I looked at him, really looked, and I saw something I hadn't seen in years. Honesty. Regret. The beginning of accountability. Not excuses, not deflection. Just raw, painful truth. "We can start small," I said finally. "No promises. No expectations. Just showing up. Actually showing up. Not just saying you will. I can do that. Can you?" "Yes." He met my eyes. "Yes, I can. I want to." He stayed for an hour. We drank tea. We talked about small things. His job, the weather, a book he was reading about the history of jazz. It wasn't profound. It wasn't a Hollywood reunion with swelling music and tearful embraces. But it was real. It was a start. After he left, I sat on the couch in the quiet house and cried. Not from sadness. From something closer to relief. From the fragile, terrifying hope that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late for some of us. A week later, Diana texted, "Can we talk?" I stared at the message for a long time before responding. Yes. I called her that evening. She answered on the second ring, her voice small and uncertain. She apologized, stumbling over her words, explaining how overwhelmed she'd been, how she'd taken me for granted, how she'd convinced herself that I'd always be there so it didn't matter if she put me off one more time, one more month, one more year. "I was wrong," she said. "I was so wrong, Mom. And I don't know if you can forgive me, but I want to try. I want to be better." I listened. I didn't absolve her. I didn't say, "It's okay," or "Don't worry about it," because it wasn't okay. And I had worried about it, for years. But I didn't shut her out either. We agreed to meet for coffee the following month. Small steps. No grand gestures. Theodore never called. And slowly, painfully, I made peace with that. Some people don't come back. Some people can't. And that has to be okay too. It's been almost a year since that Christmas Eve. My life looks different now. Raymond calls every Sunday at 10 in the morning, and we talk for 20 minutes. Nothing profound, just life. He tells me about his kids' soccer games, about the book he's reading, about the new coffee shop that opened near his office. Sometimes we don't have much to say, and that's okay. The point is, He shows up. Diana visits once a month. We've started cooking together. She's learning to make Frank's mother's stuffing recipe, and last time she almost got it right. We laugh more than we used to. We talk about real things, not just surface pleasantries. She asks me questions about my life, about my book club, about the garden. She sees me. Finally, after all these years, she sees me. Theodore sends a card on my birthday, stiff and formal, signed only with his name. No personal message, no phone call, but it's something. I keep the cards in a drawer, and I hope that someday he'll find his way back. But I don't wait for it anymore. I don't know if we'll ever be close again, the way we were when they were little and thought I hung the moon. Maybe we will. Maybe we won't. But I've learned something crucial. Love isn't about enduring neglect. It's not about begging to be seen. Real love requires both people to show up. And if they won't, you have to love yourself enough to walk away. I still set the table sometimes, the good china with the gold trim. But now I invite friends. I host book club meetings in my dining room, and we drink wine and argue about whether the ending of a novel was satisfying or lazy. I make space for people who want to be there, people who choose me back. Margaret came over last week and brought her famous lemon bars. We sat at the kitchen table for 3 hours, talking about everything and nothing. Her grandchildren, my garden, the new pastor at church who tells jokes during sermons. When she left, she hugged me tight and said, "I'm glad you're here, Jo. Really here, not just going through the motions." I knew what she meant. And on quiet evenings, when the house is dark and the wind hisses softly against the windows like a whisper, I sit in Frank's old chair and feel something I haven't felt in years. Peace. Not because everything is fixed, not because all my relationships have been restored, but because I finally stopped waiting for permission to live my own life. I learned that dignity is a form of love, too. Maybe the most important form. And sometimes, the kindest thing you can do, for yourself and for others, is to stop holding on and let people find their own way back. Or not. Either way, you'll be okay. I'm okay. Last week, I planted rose bushes along the front walkway. Frank always wanted roses, but we never got around to it. Next year, we'd always say. We'll do it next year. But there is no next year. There's only this one, the one we're living right now. So I planted them, deep pink ones that will bloom in June. I probably won't be around to see them grow old, but someone will. Maybe Raymond's kids. Maybe a stranger who buys this house someday. Maybe no one. But I planted them anyway. Because some things you do not for the outcome, but for the doing itself. If this story touched something in you, I hope you'll share it. Maybe someone in your life needs to hear that it's okay to set boundaries, that it's okay to choose yourself, that love doesn't mean losing yourself in the process, that you can be a good person, a loving person, and still say, no more. And if you're still here, thank you for listening. Thank you for staying with me through this whole messy, painful, hopeful story. Subscribe if you haven't already. We share stories like this one every day, stories about ordinary people facing impossible choices and finding the courage to keep going. Leave a comment and tell me, have you ever had to let someone go to save yourself? Have you ever had to choose your own dignity over someone else's comfort? I'd love to hear your story. I'd love to know I'm not alone in this. Because here's what I've learned. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is stop pretending everything's fine. Sometimes hope doesn't look like reconciliation. Sometimes it looks like walking away. Sometimes it looks like planting roses you might never see bloom. Sometimes it looks like setting a table for friends instead of ungrateful children. Sometimes it looks like drinking tea alone in a quiet house and feeling, for the first time in years, like that's enough. And sometimes, the people we love the most are the ones we have to love from a distance. Not because we've stopped loving them, but because we've started loving ourselves. I'm still learning that, but I'm learning. And every day I wake up in this house, pour my coffee, look out at the garden I'm building, and I think, I'm here. I'm still here. And that's enough. That's more than enough. That's everything.